So we have known a little bit about case studies definition, types, example research by now. But when do we know that case study is a suitable method for our research, right? That's a very important question. So relations among different research methods are not linear, but many still believe that case studies are only appropriate for the only initial phase of the investigation. While other research methods like surveys, histories are appropriate for the descriptive phase, and experiments, for example, are the only way of pursuing explanatory or causal inquiries. So this is what we call hierarchical or linear view. But there's a but. So each method, in fact, can serve different research purposes in another view that is called inclusive or pluralistic view. So, for instance, case study not only can do exploratory research work, but also descriptive or explanatory work. So that we explained before, the same applies for other research methods as well. And all these 5, for instance, are typical research methods used in social science. Maybe in sciences there are other different types. So we also have science students in the group. Maybe you can share with us more in the Slack or in the future sharing event. And how to decide when to use case study instead of other 4, for instance. So there are 3 rules to guide you. First is the form of your research question. As we said before, case study tackles very well how and why this kind of research questions. And similarly, experiment and history also tackles how and why. Well, survey and archival analysis, they tackle more like who, what, where, how many, how much, this kind of research questions. And the second rule is require control over behavioral events. So how much control you can have over the events you are observing, for instance. So case study, yes. History, no, because history is you have no control over the past. You mainly dealing with the dead past, right? Archival analysis also usually deal with notes, meeting notes, for instance, past literature, past news reports, this kind of thing. Survey also, no. Experiment, yes. And focus on contemporary events. That's the third rule. For instance, case study focus on contemporary events. Oh, yo, what happened? Okay. That's the reminder of the last recording's conversion finished. So case study deals with the contemporary events, while history deals with past events. So when they say contemporary, what it means a fluid rendition of the recent past and the present. So it's not just the present, but also include the past. It's like a continuous connection between the past and present. Okay. So that's the first half of the presentation. And in the second part of the presentation, I will share about 3 main things. So one is to share about research design by elaborating 5 components. And then the second one is the case study research design to introduce 4 variants. And the third one is how to select research design for case study. So let's start. So the first thing is about 5 components. When you do a research design for case study, what kind of components you should write about? So the first one is you need to define your research questions. The second one is the propositions or hypothesis, if you may say in quantitative research. And the third one is define your cases. Fourth is linking data and propositions. 5 is criteria for interpreting the findings' strength. So let's introduce one after another. First is the questions. So how to define the questions. Different people have different ways, right? But in this book, they give 3 tips on how to define your questions when you do case study research. One is you read the past literature to find 1 or 2 key topics. It doesn't have to be like too many, too specific, but you have to understand your research interest by reading, interacting with the past literature. And then the second is you examine a set of key studies by searching in no matter Google Scholars or different academic databases like Scopus, ISI Web of Science, ProQuest. You go there, use the keywords that can represent these topics, and you read a first set of key studies, usually highly cited ones, okay, to start from the most influential ones and then going down, right? So you check their the questions they suggest for further studies, or the hypothesis or propositions they suggest for further studies, or in the future studies part, what kind of future research directions they were suggesting. You look at these parts. And then the third tip is to examine a second set of studies on the same topic. So going through the same thing, but this time is not to discover, but to reinforce what you have known, to sharpen what you have known. Okay, so that is how you can define your research questions. And the second one is the propositions. So why propositions are important for case study research design, possibly also for any other type of research design. Imagine that, Christopher Columbus, here is an analogy for that. Imagine Christopher Columbus went to Queen Isabella saying, I want to find, in India, right? So please give me 3 ship. I will ship the whole crew into the West. This kind of thing, how I can know I actually found India. All these aspects he needed to explain to Queen Isabella. Why 3 ship, not 4, not 5, right? Why I'm shipping into the West, not the East, right? How did I define the criteria that I recognize they are Indian, not European, right? All these criteria, they can reflect it in the propositions to guide the research, to guide the direction, to convince other scholars, to intrigue the research interest of the community. So the third component is cases, to define the cases. This is also the most difficult part, I would say, how to define the case. It may sound simple, but when you do it, it's a little bit difficult, yes. Because cases are also sources of data, right? In a lot of instances, that doesn't happen just rarely. In a lot of instances, when you define a case, and then you go inside, you realize there are more of it, or it's the wrong case that you are looking at. So you have to correct it over the procedure. But a case can be a person, can be event, can be community, can be program, school, etc. And it usually has spatial and temporal boundary as defined in the concept that we introduced before. So let's say there are more concrete and less concrete cases. On the first top half is, for instance, individuals, small groups, organizations, projects, that they're very concrete. You can directly observe them, right? And then the less concrete would be like communities, relationships, decisions, partnerships. You kind of can observe through direct, interaction of people, action of people. But there are also not concrete cases, like for instance, really, let's say trust. It's a bit difficult to observe this kind of thing. So cases usually it has to be very concrete thing that you can directly observe easily. So that will reduce your difficulty of observing the cases or recording the cases, explore the cases. The fourth component is linking data and the propositions. So that involves steps and analytic techniques. It cannot be summarized easily. We are going to talk that in detail in the future sharing event. And the fifth one is criteria for interpreting the findings strength. So in quantitative research, you usually, for instance, have p-level to indicate the significance level, right? So if p-level is less than 0.05, is very significant, for instance. But in qualitative research, like a case study, how you don't have p-level, for instance, p-value, right? So in this case, we address rival explanations in findings. So your propositions have some rival situations, right? So the more rival situations you can reject, the better your result can be generalized. So that's one thumb rule for evaluating the quality of your case study. How many rival explanations you include and address in your research. That's very important. So here are four quadrants of case study research design. We already said if you divide a case study by research purpose, you have three, right? Explorative, descriptive, explanatory case study research. Here, we divide into four quadrants here based on what? Based on number of cases you use. So either single or multiple cases, that's the horizontal axis. And the vertical axis is either how many units of analysis you are using. So either holistic on just one single unit of analysis, or embedded, that is multiple units of analysis. So what is unit of analysis here? Usually in a case, if it's a case by itself, it cannot be divided into sub-cases or sub-unit anymore. It's a holistic, okay? It's just one single one holy thing. If it can contain sub-units, you divide it into sub-units. For instance, school. If you are studying school as a case, but it has departments, right? And inside departments, you have students and the teachers. You see different subdivision already. And that, for the school system, that would be like embedded, because it contains a subdivision inside the case. So I use the blue arrow here to say from left to right, it's replications. So if you are from science departments, you probably already are very familiar with this idea when you do experiments. So for instance, if you are doing an experiment, usually you don't do them the similar experiment at the same time, right? You do one experiment with a certain protocol, procedure, conditions. You do it first. When you get the result, you replicate another one, another two, another three to prove or reject, to basically repeat the first experiment you did. And that is replication. So from left to right is replication. So this is, let's say, 1. Okay, when you copy and paste to the right side 4 times, it becomes this. Can you see that? So from the left side, this embedded design, this is 1. You copy paste 4 times, it becomes this. Okay, that's a very, very important, idea you have to understand in multiple case study. For instance, I will explain you later more, because replication, many people will, for instance, do multiple case study research, like they do case studies, multiple times, sometimes at the same time. But that's not quite the situation. When I was reading this book, I feel that's not quite the situation. So you usually start from 1, and then you repeat this to get either well, extreme different cases or similar cases, right? This is the right direction to go, replication, instead of sampling. Okay, sampling in survey is like you cast the net to different respondents and collect the response at the same time, possibly. And replications is you do one and repeat that one continuously in the later stages. So single case study design, there are 5 rationales. I hope I will not overuse the time again. Okay, single case study design, there are 5 rationales. One is critical case, one is unusual case, one is common case, one is revelatory case. The final one is longitudinal case. So I use some quantitative concept that you understand what is unusual case. So basically like outlier. So it's very different from other cases, unusual. Common case is like the most frequently appearing case, very representative of the whole sample, I would say, mode. So common case. They are very easy to understand. Longitudinal case also is like pre-post test. So let's say that is to basically observe the case of 2 different or multiple different time points before or after certain point. So that is like pre-post test. So these 3 cases are very easy to understand. The a little bit tricky cases type are critical case and revelatory case. So critical case is critical in the sense of testing theory or theoretical propositions. So you have a theory or you have a proposition indicating in this kind of situation, this will happen. Or in this kind of situation, this kind of proposition stand. So you search for that kind of critical case that meet the demand of this theory or proposition and observe it, analyze it. Okay, in the sense of proving or testing the theory. And the other one is the revelatory case. So revelatory is like to reveal something unknown before. So in this case, it means before this kind of case was not accessible to the inquiry, but now suddenly it becomes accessible. So I give some examples here. For instance, suddenly you develop a very good relationship with these smugglers in a community, or you get to know the mother of drug dealers and he agreed to help you to study drug dealers in an avenue. So that will be revelatory case. So there are in total 5 rationales for you to understand the differences between cases and how to select them and what kind of case you are facing. Okay, so there are 2 designs. So in the single case study, as we can see here, we have a single case, but you can either have a holistic single case or embedded single case. Okay, go back. So holistic design is to dealing with the whole of something or someone, so no subdivision, right? So theory, it can happen when the case doesn't have subdivision or subunits, or the theory applied is of a holistic nature. Okay, for instance, you are studying a person, and this theory is on the personal level, because the theory can apply to different levels. It can be, organizational level theory, or society level theory, culture level theory, individual level theory. So theory applied is of a holistic nature to one single unit. For instance, individual level, you can use the holistic design of single case study. And the case study's focus may get shifted without being noticed when you use a single case holistic design. That's a risk to address. So the second type is embedded design. So you have multiple subdivisions inside that case, and it serves as a very important device for maintaining the focus of a case study. So very often embedded design, the focus is not easy to be shifted, but in single case design, it can be a bit tricky. And then we move to multiple case study design. So compared to single case design, Simple case study design. In multiple case study design, the evidence is more compelling because you have multiple cases to retrieve the evidence. And usually people consider multiple case study design will produce more robust results. And but in a lot of cases, in some cases, multiple case study cannot usually satisfy rationales that supports a single case study. When I say that, I mean there's 5 rationales. For instance, if you just have one unusual case, you cannot use multiple case study because that's just one case that is very unique, right? So you cannot satisfy that rationale to retrieve an unusual case. And then another one is require extensive resources and times compared to studying one case. You study multiple cases. That's you know, as you remember, replication. Do that just like do experiment. Do that multiple times and do that one time. The required time, resources, manpower is different. And multiple cases is like, to a degree, if you want to explain it, it is like multiple experiments instead of multiple respondents to survey, as I explained before. So you follow replication logic instead of sampling logic. So you get result from first case, and then you replicate that condition to other cases to get either same or different results. So now let's talk about replication rule. That's very important when you do multiple case study design. There are 2 rules. So one is liberal replication, one is theoretical replication. So liberal replication means individual cases you select or you observe, you studied, they predict similar results. So it's like repeating, actually proving the same thing. And then theoretical replication is individual case studies predict contrasting results, but for anticipatable reasons. So one is the same result, similar result, one is different result. And usually these 2 replications, I introduce it like it's separated, but in a lot of cases, they can combine together. So I will give you an example. This is not well advised, a book written by this Peter Zandong in 2001. This is a perfect example to demonstrate to you how both rules can be applied in one research design of case study research. So in this study, they actually reviewed experiences of numerous attempts by university and non-university research groups when they try to advise city officers, government officers. So they adopted multiple case studies research approach. First, they did 8 cases of different university research groups. They conducted a research but failed to help city governments. So it's 8 similar cases producing similar results, all failed. That's literal replications. And then followed by 5 cases that's different non-university groups also failed. So that's another literal replications, 5, but non-university groups. And the third one, the number of cases I didn't know, because from reading this case study research book, it didn't say, only say the third group of cases. So I use this symbol here. So the third group of cases is university groups. They succeeded in helping other sectors like businesses and engineering firms, but they are not city government officers. Okay, so the fourth group are 3 cases. There are university groups succeeded in helping city government officers by considering both research and implementation. So that is also literal replications. All 4 groups by themselves, they are literal replications saying similar results. But if you combine them in one study, that is theoretical replications because they also represent 2 different contrasting results. right? So that's a perfect example to demonstrate you this. So the procedure of doing multiple case study, as you can see from this graph, first you develop the theory, then you select cases, you write the protocol for data collection, and then you lead the first case study, write single case report, you lead the second case study, write single report, lead the remaining case studies, write single report, remember replication. And then you arrive at the conclusion of the cases and you modify the theory, develop implication, and write the final report considering all cases, like what this author was doing, okay? So you may ask, when you select case study, how do you know it's single or multiple, for instance? When, so the rule is, when with choice, when you have abundant resources, multiple case designs are better than single case designs. So if you have the choice, choose the multiple over single, unless you really have this unusual case that you cannot find a second case, right? So another one will be replication takes place even with just two cases. Even with two cases, you can generalize the result better than one single case. The result is more convincing. For instance, some scholars will use two-tail design. So pick two extreme cases of the same phenomenon, and then say, okay, this theory stands for both situations, and it can be generalized better than just one extreme of the situation. So you may also ask, it can be closed or adaptive. So usually, as I said before, that the design is not linear, it's iterative. So it's usually backward and forward. You can modify the design fluidly during the process, but always remember this kind of alteration should be done carefully, okay, with caution. And every time when the alteration happens, you should record it in your research report. And the final one will be mixed with other methods or not. So the design of the research, the case study research can be modified by new information you get, the new discoveries you didn't anticipate during the whole process. And sometimes you need to, oh, this is repeating, I think. Okay, this is a mistake. I am repeating it from the last slide. But anyway, according to many scholars, they also sense that case study, especially multiple case studies, they kind of already represent a form of mixed methods research. As you can see, recent years, mixed methods research are gaining popularity among scholars because it is a combination of quantitative and qualitative research to reach the result. So it's very flexible, and it combines the optimized methods choice for you to draw conclusions. So it becomes more and more popular. And you know, after my explanation, probably you also have this impression. Case studies can actually be very well integrated with mixed methods research design. For instance, if you look at this figure 2.6 on the right, a case study within a survey, for instance. So okay, running out of time again, but I can make it. Survey of multiple clinics. Okay, you distribute surveys to your patients, for instance, and then case study of one or more clinics that were surveyed. A little bit like a survey followed up by interviews, right? But here is surveys followed up by case studies of, for instance, unusual cases, right, or representative cases. And then the right half part is survey within a case study. So case study of a single clinic, you look at this unit and you survey all the sub-individuals inside that clinic, for instance. So as you can see, it can be very flexible. And that's it. I made it. The meeting will end in 10 minutes. So these are all references that I quoted. when I was preparing for this presentation. So I'm going to use the remaining 10 minutes for any questions you might have. Okay, so you can unmute yourself and we can discuss a little bit before we close this sharing event.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Mo. And as I type in the chatting room, I said that how many times is enough for the replication?
How many times is not for the replication?
Yes, you mentioned sometimes it's very
how many times is enough for replication?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I will introduce that further in the future event because, to be honest, I'm just covering the first 2 chapters in depth so far. So, to understand the how many times, I gotta share with you in the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. So, any other questions or any comments on this presentation? Like to.
Yes, Jingjing, I have a question.
Yes.
For the case study, the exploratory case study, so you give an example like you want to discover the nature of one phenomenon that you don't really quite understand, and that's why take the exploratory case study. So I want to know what's the difference between that and grounded, if you want to take a grounded theory approach. So I was a little confused. Because you both, at that time, you both don't know what theory might be applicable, and you just want to know more, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's a very interesting question. Well, for the grounded theory, I used it once, I think, but I didn't know I was using grounded theory. So, yeah. So I was actually interviewing several instructors, and along the process, I found this pattern out of the interview scripts. So their responses to my open-ended questions. And that generated a small theory of a flow theory, I would say. But when it comes to case study, let me think about it. It's a little bit. Anybody has comment? I think I'm a little bit confused as well. So I needed to think about it in depth. Cannot just throw out comments like this. But I would like to continue this discussion in the Slack. But if anybody have any clue at the moment, we can discuss as well.
About the
Felix, do you have any idea about this?
Could you please repeat the question again? So I'm kind of missing.
So Jiaying is like being confused about, when to use grounded theory approach, when to use exploratory case study. So it seems like they are both suitable for exploring uncertain territory of a research topic.
Oh, well, I'm not sure. Sorry.
I feel like this both can work. I mean, there are 2 different, usually, as I said before, but this is what I can tell you at the moment, but I would like to further the talk later in Slack. But as you can see from this table, I mean, different research methods, usually they serve different research purposes perfectly. So a case study can be used for different reasons, right? I believe grounded theory, yes, in this case, serve very well for the exploratory research. Maybe you can both use them. Maybe you can both use them depending on your familiarity with the research method at hand. Let's say you are more familiar or comfortable with the grounded theory, probably you will go with the grounded theory. If you are more familiar with the case study, maybe you will start with the case study. That's my hunch. But anybody else earlier, Xiuting, right, wanted to share something?
Yeah. So when I'm learning the qualitative study, the grounded theory, I think is is one method, but when we but the targets, our targets, the number of targets is sometimes is larger than the case study, I think.
So grounded theory, you think the sample size is bigger than case studies sample size in usual?
Yes, in my opinion.
Okay.
Well, yeah, okay. When I studied the qualitative study, I don't know much about the case study, but the grounded theory always comparing with the, for example, content analysis. And if the interview time is deep enough, if the interview is deep enough, and the talking is deep enough, and we can explore deeper into the content, so we can use the grounded theory. If not that case, we can only code the sentences and drag some code and the categories and develop into themes. So that's what I learned from the lesson, but I don't know much about the case study. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I think this can be our like small homework after this event. So I would like to see chats on Slack to discuss about this, to contribute on Slack about the comparison of using grounded theory or case study for exploratory research.